Hey everyone, I'm gonna go ahead and get started. I want to welcome you guys. This is week three. Before I get started and before I forget, if you guys don't mind to put your name in the chat box, that's how I more or less take row and document who is here so I can give you your participation points. So if you guys would just take a minute to do that for me, I'd appreciate it. So hope everyone's having a good week up to this point. It's hump day, so we're kind of on the downhill slide now. So in our 804 class I just got finished with, a lot of them were having really busy weeks, lots of IEPs due, and so kind of that time of the season. So anyway, kind of circle back. You guys had the interview report that was done last week, submitted. I've got all those scored back to you. You guys all did a good job with your groups. I've got all the peer rubrics, so everything in Gradebook is updated. So I appreciate your time on that. Before we get started and on week three, did anyone have anything that really stood out to them after you guys did your interviews? Anything in your particular group? Did you see a wide range of experience just within your group you were paired up with, or anything that just maybe caught your attention that maybe you didn't realize? Anyone? Everybody's quiet tonight. It's like crickets, huh?
Something our group talked about is we didn't realize the plethora of testing and
Yeah,
how there are certain ones for certain needs and certain
right.
for each student is different, of course, and
Exactly.
there's
Yeah.
just so many tests out there.
There's numerous. I mean, you can lose track of them. I mean, literally. And you have specific tests that are designed for specific, suspected disabilities that you utilize, and then there's even multiple just on adaptive behavior scales and ratings. I mean, there's multiple of those. So you're right. There is a plethora of those. There's a lot, and don't know if any of your interviewees mentioned just looking at cost associated with those assessments. Some of the districts, a lot of them will buy those test kits, and then periodically you have to go in and buy more protocols, and just buying those alone is not cheap. Most of them come in packages of 25. So again, once you buy your initial testing kits, there's still associated cost with that. So yeah, interesting point. Any others? Any other points?
I was gonna say our group brought just different kinds of experience in education
Yeah,
and just different amount of years. And we had one that was going to be school psych, I think, and then the other two of us were like the special ed teachers. So we all brought a lot of good stuff to the table.
sure. See a wide variety of experience. That's another really neat thing about doing this project. Yeah, good points. Any others? So again, I mentioned not uncommon when I see the group projects just within an individual group itself. I think Jared is the one that commented on that. Maybe you see some that maybe only had five, and another interviewee within that group that maybe had 30 plus. So it's always interesting to see what their responses are based on their experience. So I noticed one I was reading on your submission, particular group, some of the questions, and the interview said, "Oh man, this is a loaded question." And because there's just so many different things, so many different directions you could go. So, anyway, again, I hope you found that to be beneficial. I know a lot of times when you mention group project, especially with this being an online class, people tend to go, "Oh my gosh, how are we going to do it?" So, hopefully, you and your group was able to communicate, took some of the suggestions I gave you as far as being able to contribute, actively contribute by using the shared docs, maybe doing a Zoom meeting. So everything else moving forward will be all individually done. So no more group. Okay. So it's all individually done moving forward. So if you look at, we're starting module two this week. Week three is getting into testing and assessment for special education. So we've got some different resources for you to use here, open education resources. There's one here on informal assessments. There's some examples, and I'm going to go over some and share some with you this evening. Also, easycbm.com. This is a website that you'll definitely want to use later on when we get into our third assessment we'll work with, which is a CBM. But informals are very similar to CBMs. Okay. And here's another one on Easy CBM Norms, a website that takes you to a resource for some reading. So I'm going to exit out of this. I want to make sure you're aware this Sunday, you'll have your informal assessment report due with a lesson plan. So I'm going to show you an example. We're going to talk about some different informal assessments, and probably one of the biggest, or maybe something that's new to you, maybe a change, is within the reports. We're going to look at how to present the data that we collect, okay, using the table, chart, or graph. So let me get into this week. I want to go scroll down. Okay, so I'm going to show you an example. This is in your course shell. It's right when you click on Module 2. So this is kind of the format of doing the reports and submitting them. Again, I mentioned that we've got an example for each one of these you're going to do. This is the example I've got of the informal. Okay, so you have the abstract section at the very beginning. And then we have our different sections, and I'm going to show you this so you can kind of follow it in the syllabus on the rubric. But the first section that you're going to address on this is the identifying information, okay, of the case study student that you use for this. And so you're going to tell a little bit about that student. You're going to talk about the informal assessment that was used. You'll talk about the date or dates that the informal assessment was administered. You're going to just tell just a little bit about the overall assessment and a little bit about the student. You're going to talk more about the specific background of the student. When we're doing that, guys, you don't want to use the student's real name. You want to use a pseudonym, or you want to use initials. This student, graduate student in the report, you'll notice they put XC, was 42 months or 3.5 years of age, and they attend a half-day preschool. So they're telling a little bit about the background of the student. Okay, telling a little bit about their schedule, a little bit about maybe they're from a foreign country. They may be the oldest of 3 siblings. A little bit about maybe if they've been recently identified with any disabilities, or like this one here was identified with speech and language delay. Okay. And just any background information you can share, even a little bit about the family. Okay. Is the student residing with grandparents? Are they residing in a foster home? Is mom in prison? Is dad in prison? So anything like that that you think is valuable information. Okay, so that's identifying information and student background. The next section that we'll focus on is providing your test results and then interpreting those. Informal assessments are exactly what the name says. It's something that is very informal that you can use to determine how well your student understands concepts that you are currently teaching. It's a way to gauge if they've gained a complete understanding of it. It's also something that can be administered in perhaps 2 minutes or less, something quick. And I'm going to give you some examples of that. A common one I bring up could be an exit ticket. You've taught something in class, they're getting ready to transition to another class, and you say, hey, the last 30 seconds, I want you to take out a scrap piece of paper and I want you to write down 3 things that you learned from this, or I'm going to put 3 practice problems on the board. I want you to work through them real quick, write down the answer, hand me your exit ticket when you leave. Could be something that simple. Could be a teacher made. Doesn't have to be anything that's commercially or professionally produced. It could be something that you produce or that you make as far as an assessment. Okay. So you're going to talk a little bit about what your assessment entailed. What skills did you assess? We asked you to do 3 informals. You could do 2 on math, 1 on language arts, 2 on spelling, 1 on math. Whatever you want to do, you can mix it up, or they can be three separate ones over the same area. It could be three different ones on math skills. Could be a spelling, a language arts, and a math. However you want to mix it up. It's totally up to you. So you'll explain the informal assessment you did, and then you're going to talk a little bit about what the student was asked to do. Was it math computation? Was it memory recall? Whatever the skill was, and then how they performed. Okay. How did they score on it? Most of the scores that we're looking at on this and we're going to report on is what we call raw scores. So, Jared, if you had 5 questions on there and they got 3 out of 5, their raw score was 3 out of 5. We would present that in a little table or chart or graph. Okay. We're just simply looking at raw scores for this assignment. Okay. So we'll go through and tell how each one of them did. And then we're going to ask you to display some data in a table, charts, or graphs. You can see here for one of the informal assessments that they used a pie chart, right? And so they were actually assessing some of their fine motor skills due to their younger age. Okay, they felt like there were some challenges there with motor skills, and so they did that, and they gave a key down here. So you can see a majority of the time they were able to demonstrate that they mastered specific fine motor skills. 2 times out of 8, so you can see there was 8 attempts. They weren't able to demonstrate. So 25% of the time they didn't. 75% of the time they could. So it's a simple way to visually represent the data that you collected from your informal assessment. Okay. Creating this right here, depending on your comfort level, it could be using PowerPoint, table, chart, and graph. You can do it using Word, whatever um, platform you're comfortable with, you can do that as long as you provide a table, chart, and graph and display your data. So that's one of them there. So you can see figure 2. They had another one here, degree and demonstration. So this was one, again, focusing on motor skills, different type of table, chart, and graph. We had a pie graph before. Now we've got this type of chart or graph that's here. You can see over here, they labeled it number of skills demonstrated. Okay. Total of 7. Okay. 3 times they could do it consistently. 6 times, 6 of them they demonstrated it sometimes, and not yet able to demonstrate was 1. And so they provided that in the table, chart, and graph. The last one was they provided a table, skills used to initiate interaction with peers or with adults. Here are the different things that they were using to engage or initiate interaction. Eye contact, smiles, touches, hugs, points to objects, giving a toy, vocalization, says peer's name. With adults, what did the child do? Used 1 to 2 word utterances, used 3 word utterances with support, and then pointed to objects. Literally, there's documenting and displaying it in this table. Okay. Something that's very informal. Okay. So we're kind of easing into how to display some of our data, because as we go through the class, we'll get a little bit more detailed with that. Okay. So we start off very basic. So this section, test results and interpretation, tends to be the longest part of the report that you put together. The next section, based on the data you collected and seeing how your student performed, you're going to draft up in this section your recommendation and then kind of conclude what are some recommendations. So for the particular student in this example, indicated here as a result of the assessments, XC has a solid foundation for fine motor skills, emerging gross motor, and adapted social interaction skills that are not typical for children his age. Okay. Listed some strengths there. Now, what about maybe some weaknesses? Based on the assessment and parent input, XC would benefit from more exposure to practice in his motor skills. So they're going in making recommendations. identifying what the student did well, making a recommendation based on the data, and then they're concluding. They're often a conclusion. So continued speech therapy will aid in improving. Overall, he demonstrates promising motor skills and willingness to use language with adult support. So it's basically kind of summing it up, wrapping it up. Okay. Getting type of reference, you would cite it there. Then we scroll down and here is the parent permission form. So you want to make sure that the parent understands that you're going to utilize some informal assessments. And so you would write them on here. What informal assessments? They use a rating scale, a checklist, and observation. Okay. The other two are for assessments on down the road. It was the same student used for all the assessments, and so they got the parent permission and just added the assessments as we work through the course. Okay. You'll include that. Include your permission form when you submit it. And then for this assignment, we're asking you to include copies of the informal assessment. So you can see they had a fine motor checklist that the teacher did, okay, with some specific things that they're looking for, tasks that the student could do, and they indicate whether they did it or not. Okay, check mark obviously means they could, X perhaps not. Okay, scroll down, we had a rating scale. That's another informal assessment. Here it lists skills. Hops and stands on one foot up to 5 seconds. Could he do it consistently? Sometimes or not yet. So he just went through there and rated them. That's all he did. It's an informal way to assess. You're just simply asking them or observing to see if they can do any of this. Also on here, they indicated they maybe didn't see this done at school, but they relied on parent input. They indicated right here and they marked it. Runs with a stride. Okay, parent input, they indicated here. Parent indicated that they sometimes could do it. Uses writing toys. You can see here, an asterisk, parent input, sometimes. Okay, and then here's their observation. They did an observation, a simple observation. So the three that they did. Okay, and that's it. So that's how the report's laid out. You can use this as an example. So this week, like I said, we'll have the introduction, the background information, we'll have the test results and interpretation, and the recommendation and conclusion. The next one we'll add another section in there. Okay, but for this informal, that's what we're looking at. Remember, guys, and I'm going to show you the point breakdown on this. You don't want to forget these because it's a significant amount of points for the tables, charts, and graphs that you'll do in there. Scroll too far up. For these tables, charts, and graphs, in this section, there were quite a few points, so we don't want to overlook that. Okay, so I just want to show you where that example was. All right. Any questions on that? Just the format of it, what we're going to be looking for, and I'll show you exactly the point breakdown in the rubric as well. No, on that, I'm going to exit out of that. Again, this is right under Module 2. It's right there. When you first click on Module 2, it's going to be the first thing you see. Example of assessment report. Okay. If you expand, it says Week 3 Assessments in Special Education. Here are some what we call OERs, Open Educational Resources. It provides some different documents. It'll give you ideas on some common education tests used for special education. I'm going to click here. This is kind of a comprehensive list. This will give you may recognize some of the names based on just some of the tests that your interviewees mention. This is more formal assessments, but you can see there is a lot out there. It just kind of breaks it down into language assessment, some different over here. It breaks it down for cognitive intelligence, verbal intelligence. You can see the list of them. Those tend to be the more common, more popular, widely used. Yes, so we get on down here and we've got specific ones for auditory. We get down here for auditory discrimination. So again, it's just a resource for you to look at, to show you, and it goes along with one of the comments. I think maybe Jared or one of them mentioned was kind of shocked by just the number of assessments that are out there. So I just kind of wanted to show you that and share it with you. Here are some early identifier screenings. It's a website that takes you to some of the early screeners that are on there. This is a good source to go to. It's Early Childhood Technical Assistance Center. So again, I would challenge you, encourage you to look at that resource. I wanted to get down and show you, um, here is a list of what are some common informal assessments. Okay, a checklist. You saw that in the sample report, right? That I just went over. Observation, that was in there. Portfolio could be an ongoing informal assessment where you're having children add artifacts to their portfolio, and it gives you the opportunity to informally assess them throughout the year as they're putting artifacts into that. You use a rating scale, time sampling, event sampling, or anecdotal record. Okay, those are just some ideas for types of informal assessment. This is a really great resource I want to share with you before I kind of go over the slide deck and point out some key terms to you. This has an informal assessment example for each letter of the alphabet. That's why they call it the ABCs of informal assessment. It's a list of A to Z. So for each letter of the alphabet, it provides you an informal assessment idea. A, anticipatory guides, and it gives you an example. B, bump in the road. It's an activity and explains. It's an informal assessment. Students write down something from the lesson they found confusing or difficult. Okay. Great resources. It will give you an example for each single letter of the alphabet from A to Z. Different informal assessments. So if you're having a brain block and you think, oh my gosh, what am I going to do? Here, and it explains it right there. I mentioned a while ago, exit ticket or an exit card. Okay, you write a response to a question posed by the teacher on a sticky note or slip of paper as they exit just to see, did they understand what I was talking about? Or can they give me an example to go along with the concept that I just taught? Okay, again, great resource right here. Okay, it's all right there under week 3. All right. I'm going to go up really quick to the slide deck. It's got some information kind of want to go over when it comes to assessment. Everyone see my screen all right? Everyone good? Okay. So I mentioned CBM and it linked you to a couple websites in the syllabus as an open education resource. And I mentioned informal assessment is very similar to CBM. CBM is just a little bit more structured. Informal is something really, like I said, you can give in just 1 to 2 minutes. Something that's very quick, easy to do. But I kind of wanted to share this with you. I'm going to move my deal here with contemporary assessment model. So one thing that we're doing with assessment is we're trying to gather information, one, to determine whether the students are understanding what we are currently teaching or the concepts that we taught in our lesson. The second thing is we're wanting to use it for some documentation, especially to determine if students might be falling behind. So it helps us maybe identify or provide some early identifiers for students that may have some skill gaps. Okay. Frequent ongoing assessment is nothing bad. It gives you information. I always say you want to make sure you're collecting data and understand. You don't want to assume that they're understanding Pam and just keep moving forward when in actuality they never understood it from day one, and that gap is just getting wider as you go because we're going under the assumption that they understood it. Okay, so it's always important to kind of monitor, assess, and collect data. We also wanted to monitor that, and then if we see even as a whole, your class is struggling, then we want to look for some alternative strategies to help meet their needs. Do I need to go back and reteach? Do I need to break it down into smaller segments and present it to them? So those are different things. Different types of assessment when we're talking about informal. We have a curriculum-based assessment and a CBM, or curriculum-based measurement. Basically, the curriculum-based assessment is considered informal, Okay, it's used from content within the curriculum on a specific topic. Compared to the CBM, it monitors student progress frequently. So we might give that very frequently over a short period of time and change up what we call a probe or the instrument that we're using to assess them. And we'll talk about CBM probes later on, like about week 6. But we tend to give that to them multiple times, Pam. We may give them a small informal assessment or probe, same thing, and we give it to them, and we may give them something very similar, but not in the same order. It's same skill, same level of difficulty, but maybe it's in different order to see how they score. We can do that multiple times and then go back and calculate and determine, do they need interventions implemented? Okay, so it's a good way to monitor that. It also helps you uh, or helps them achieve a goal for the year. It lets you monitor their progress in an ongoing manner, in a very informal manner, where the curriculum-based assessment is more of a summative. It tends to be taken at the end of an instructional period, like the end of a chapter test, a unit, end of the 9 weeks, or the end of the semester. So it's a little bit some of the differences there. Compared to a CBM to an informal, we scale it way back. It's something very quick, something short, usually 2, 3, no more than 5 items, and something that can be done no more than 2 minutes. Okay, so it's a very quick way to do it. When we look at a little bit more structured on CBM, it's a reliable and valid way to kind of measure their progress. It is also easy for you to understand, so you can easily adjust instruction. And also, it's a great way for you to present data to the regular classroom teacher, or even the parent. And it's easy to explain. It's very easy. It's not complex, and it's not something that's right over the top of their head, but it's easy to understand. It's also easy to as I mentioned, explain to parents and also your leadership team when it comes to making up decisions for testing. Okay. The measures they tend to be used frequently throughout the school year, and they are very inexpensive. Literally, they can be teacher made. Okay. You don't have to go out and spend thousands of dollars on them. Okay. Different ways for constructing informal assessment. I'm going to say informal for tonight because they're very closely related to the CBMs. You could do some on fluency, give some fluency probes or some fluency informal assessments. Okay, you could select some grade level passages, ask them to read it. You could identify a number of words correctly per minute, calculate their accuracy rate, or identify words missed. You could give what we call the maze test or a closed test. And so comprehension, you're giving them a passage with missing words. Okay. And they have to go in there and analyze that passage and put in the words that they feel like are appropriate in order for that passage to make sense and that you can comprehend. If it's a younger student, you might want to give them 3 choices. Okay. For each missing word, give them choice A, B, or C. Make a little multiple choice. This is more for a resource for you. These are recommended weekly reading goals as far as their growth in words. And so you can see by the grade level on this, this particular chart goes up to grade 6. Most reading classes stop around 5th or 6th. You don't normally see dedicated reading classes when you get up into junior high and high school. Okay, so it's embedded within the elementary curriculum. Usually it stops up around grade 6. Okay, gives you what's considered a realistic growth rate for, say, students of that age or grade level. What's considered a growth rate for students that have already been categorized in special education services, growth rate if they're in general ed classes, and then if they're really ambitious. So it just kind of gives you an idea. Again, this is more for just as a resource to give you an idea. Determining progress. if you want to do one on reading fluency, okay? You want to determine a baseline. So have the student read a passage orally a couple different times and come up with the median score as a baseline. And then maybe just come up with an aim line, a goal that you would like for them to aim for within the next 4 weeks when you take them through some of it. So here's a way to calculate baseline. Second grade student, you determine their baseline was 55. Weekly increase based on the previous chart I showed you. It's recommended that they increase by 1.5 words. There's 25 weeks of school left. We'll take 25 weeks of school times the weekly increase. It's recommended that they increase by 1.5, so that's 38. You take 38 after you calculated it and you add it to their baseline, and at the end of the 25 weeks, you hope to see their score, their rate up in the low 90s, up around 93. So that's simple calculation on that. Again, going back and using this chart here as a guide. Okay. So fluency, you could plot data 1 or 2 times a week. You could just go in there and record it and just kind of plot it. And if they kind of fall below the aim line, you may have to make some adjustments. Okay. It could be getting that the content's too hard. So there's different ways to do it. You could have a trend line. There's different ways to plot it. Okay. That's just kind of an example. Comprehension. Some of you might be wanting to do an informal assessment on comprehension. Select a grade level passage. Keep your first sentence intact. After that, you want to go in and delete every, let's say, seventh word and leave a blank. Then give maybe 3 words for the blank. Let them select one of the three. Okay. And you want it to make contextual sense. When you develop that, you don't want it to rhyme with the correct word. You don't want to give them any type of hint, but it gives you some ideas on how to go in and set that up. Recommends you don't use nonsense words. Okay. You might want to do one in spelling. Again, these slides here are just suggestions and ideas to kind of guide you on that and how to determine if they're making adequate progress. So you want to go in and do spelling, kind of an old traditional spelling test. 12 words for grades 1 through 3 is what it's recommended. 18 words, grades 4 through 8. Now, instead of looking and counting the whole entire word wrong, you might want to score it on letter sequences. So 1 point for each 2 letters that are correct sequence, and you give them 1 point for the correct beginning and correct ending. So here's an example. Looking at the word time. Talked about a point for the beginning and the end, so we got that, and then points for correct sequencing for 2 words, right? So here's 1 point, here's two, TIMEME, 5 correct sequences. Okay, so that's how you would do that. Here are recommended weekly growth for letter sequences. Okay, so you can see here it does grades 2 through 6. It gives you what's realistic, and it gives you what a rate for students that are really ambitious. You might have math. Math is very similar to the spelling, where you're not necessarily counting the whole answer wrong, but you're looking at it digit by digit and giving them points. So you have 25 problems. They're given 2 minutes to complete. I call that the old Mad Minute. I don't know if you guys are familiar with those. We used to do them for warm-up exercises when they come in, and we did it to reinforce their math computation skills. Okay, it's kind of similar to it. We're going to score digits correct per minute. 1 point for each digit correct in the answer. So, for example, Pam, you've got 54 plus 21. Student wrote down 75. We're looking at digits, right? So they got 2 digits correct. So you plot the number of digits correct in a minute. So if you have 25 problems, you go through and count all the individual correct digits on those problems. Okay, and that's how you would plot it. Here's a chart given recommended growth rates in math, and it lists it for grades 1 through 6. Okay. Informal assessment, CBM research. It's an easy way to show progress over a period of time in academic achievement. It gives you the opportunity to modify the instructional planning if you see that their scores are inconsistent. Gives you a way to set higher goals for a class or individual students. It's also a way for you to provide a little bit more frequent ongoing feedback. It gives you as a teacher ability to modify instructional techniques more often. Okay, you may teach a concept on um, addition of two-digit um, problems, and you're seeing the class as a whole is bombing out on it. You're like, hey, I need to go back based on my data and modify my instruction. Okay. It's also good way collecting data is a pre-referral strategy. You're collecting it, you're tracking their progress, and you can identify those students that are struggling. It also gives you a prediction, or you can predict future achievement on what we call high stakes test. Anybody know what I'm talking about? High stakes test? Anybody know what that term is? Basically, it's your state test. Any type of formalized test, state tests are considered high stakes tests. They're tests given for accountability purposes, basically. Okay. So I want to talk about one other type of somewhat informal assessment. This is just more for your information. We're not really going to focus on this. I just wanted to mention it. Back in the day, our state tests, depending on what state you were working in at the time, they were given what we call criterion reference assessments. A little bit different than normed. It's not comparing, Pam, one of your students to an entire group of students across the country that's the same age, same socioeconomic background. It's not that. It's testing that student against their own ability based on the content that's been presented. So it's going to measure their ability to perform on objectives in fifth grade curriculum. Okay. It's not comparing them to a group. Okay. Our scores are going to be percentage scores. And so back in the day when states gave criterion reference assessments, I'll use Oklahoma as an example, a passing score, if a student passed their state test on this criterion referenced, was anything 70% and above was considered passing, satisfactory. That's been a long time ago. We've gotten away from that and shifted back over to norm reference, but we went through a period of time here where that's what we were given. So if you had a student scoring 70 and above, they were considered proficient. Okay. So it compares that student and their performance to a given criterion, fifth grade math, fifth grade ELA. Okay. You can make up some miniature criterion reference tests based on the criterion or the curriculum you're teaching. Again, this is kind of a glorified informal assessment. I at least want to kind of touch base with you on that, kind of give you an idea. So you go off the raw score. So, Pam, if you gave them 10 questions and they got 8 out of the 10, got 80%. Displays understanding of the content, right? So 9 or 10 out of 10 would be working at mastery level. Okay. So when a test is linked directly to the curriculum, it becomes a what we call curriculum-based assessment. Okay. And it's referred to as direct measurement. It's exactly assessing them over what was taught. It's not like you're pulling out previous materials from other grades that they've already had and presenting it. It's literally over what they went. So on a criterion, what's acceptable? So I mentioned right here, it says standards set by school grading policy. I mentioned in Oklahoma when they were doing the criterion reference test years ago, anything 70% and above was considered passing. When we think about 70 in a classroom, standard grading scale, that's C, that's average, right? 70%. We go on a traditional grading scale. Getting 5 out of 7 items correct, more than 95% mastery of an objective. So it's developing a criterion. You want to develop their criterion. What are you looking for? So if you had 80% of your class that was scoring in the 70s, that's above average. Really would like to see them more on the mastery level. We hope they are. Okay. So it's a deal you might want to go back and reteach and refocus on some objectives. Okay. Here's some criterion levels. Depending on what you want to set it at, 90 to 95% is considered the instructional level. If you're more than 95%, it's mastery. 76 to 89 is considered difficult for them. If it's less than 76, it's a failure level. So different criteria for different assessment. Okay. So it's all about what you're wanting to measure and assess and what you feel like is mastery level. I won't really get into the task analysis, error analysis. There are some slides on here that's more geared toward if you are going into testing like psychometry or school psychologists. So teacher made test, kind of more back on informal. Problems usually they usually are developed to test only at the knowledge level. Uh, the years in profession does not impact your test design. Okay, just it's a simple, straightforward test. We don't have to get overly creative on it. Um, and then also something to look at is differences between what students and teachers thought was important. That could be a problem. Okay. So you want to make sure that you're focusing on things that you've emphasized that of a level of importance on there. We don't want to just start pulling out random things and you thought it was more important than others, than what the student did. Some different format construction errors. Sometimes we all know we've got matching items, multiple choice, problem exercises, completion problems, but with that comes some construct errors or some construction errors. Okay. So here are some things that points out different common errors on there. So we want to be real careful with the wording. We want to be real careful on the options that we give them. And something as simple as a true, excuse me, true false. Um, we want to make sure that we word it properly. We don't want to do something that's required to write responses and waste time if it's true false. Okay, so there's certain things we want to look at when we develop these types of assessment to make sure that it's a good, valid, and reliable uh, assessment problem. Other informals. Examples, error analysis, task analysis, direct measurement. We talked about CBMs, checklists, questionnaires, student work samples, interviews. Those are all some different things. Here are informal assessments in reading, decoding. I don't know how many of you guys really are strong in reading, and that's kind of your subject area that you focus on, but here you could do it in decoding, you could do it in fluency, and you could do it in comprehension. And it gives you some ideas. If I want to develop a comprehension, I could do one that's answering questions about the story, or I want them to retell the story to me. If you want it on fluency, you could do an error analysis, giving them a passage to read and document how many mispronunciations or miswords they have. Okay. Uh, initial, these are reading inventory suggestions. Won't really get into that too much. I want to get down to I'm sorry, informal assessments and spelling. Could be an old-fashioned spelling test. You say the word, they use it in a sentence and then say the word, or you can analyze errors. Multiple ways you could do it. Some of you guys might teach writing. You could do an informal assessment of writing. It gives you some ideas here. You provide a written work sample and then go in and score it different ways. Okay, you can look for common mistakes, a number of actual spelling and pronunciation errors or mechanical errors. It depends on what your focus is within that writing sample. Is it more on content, or are you focusing more on assessing them with punctuation and mechanical issues? Okay, again, a lot of different examples. You could even have a performance assessment where you're asking them to complete a task and you're going to observe and score them that way. Okay. Portfolio, again, that's more of an ongoing over an extended period of time. You might want to do that for students over the course of the year, and then that way you have documented artifacts. Here's some examples of portfolio: student writing, mapping, story maps, reading logs, vocabulary journal, project papers, group projects, daily journals, writing ideas. I mean, there's an endless list of them. Okay, I'm gonna mention this. It really doesn't pertain to informal, but it's in here. Norm reference test. That's when we're comparing an individual student to a large group. Norm reference tends to be high stakes. State testing, all the formalized assessments that we give to determine special ed services are norm referenced. Okay. There are some problems with them that we have to really study and be aware of. It could be with the instrument itself. It could be with interpretation of the test results, or it could be simply in administering the test. You think, how could there be a problem with that? There are specific protocols and guidelines you have to follow in giving those. And if you deviate much from that, it's going to affect the outcome of the results that you get. It's going to affect the validity and reliability. So it's really important to follow those protocols. Another thing is it may not represent specific material that's taught in the curriculum that you're using. Okay. So let's say I'm coming in to assess a student to determine whether they're going to qualify for special services. Some of the items on there may be well above the grade level or content that you're teaching. Remember, it's a norm reference test to design to test their overall skill set. So that is a problems related to it. You have curriculum bias, lack of alternative forms may affect a test. Also, cultural and linguistic bias. Okay, that could be another problem. Okay, so we have to take those things into account. Again, not really pertaining to informal, just kind of wanted to share that with you. Okay. Any questions over that information? I know it's a lot. Some of these we tried to take some of the information off them because we just felt like it was probably didn't pertain really to your level of what you're going to be doing in an individual classroom. It's almost like some of the content coming out of that book and those slide decks was geared more for someone going into school psychometry or school psychologist. So we try to get that narrowed down to where it gives you just some of the basics that you can implement in your special education classroom to help, excuse me, document and collect data. And then also become familiar with some of the terminology. So when you're setting in those MEEGS meetings and they're going over assessment results, like a psychologist or psychometrist comes in and they start going over these detailed reports and start throwing out this terminology, and you're like, what are they talking about? After going through this course, you'll have a basic understanding of what they're talking about, and it helps you understand the data that they're presenting. Okay. And those formalized tests get really in depth statistically with data that's presented. So, is there any question on informal assessments? Again, it's something really quick. You can do it. It shouldn't take any more than 2 minutes. It's something that you can collect information on really quickly. Probably the most challenging part, I would say, and you might not be used to doing that, is taking that data and determining how to display it in some kind of visual, like that table, chart, or graph. Okay. And I always say it's really important when you're working with parents and going over assessment results, if you can develop a skill set in doing that, because we can sit here and go over data and talk numbers, and they may look at us with a deer in the headlight look. But when we can also provide them a visual representation of that data in the form of a table, a chart, or graph, sometimes that it clicks with them. They're like, I understand what you're talking about now. I see it. It makes sense to me what you're saying when they can see that. So just learning how to do that. Any question on that? Okay, one other thing I want to point out to you to make sure that everyone understands. So after you kind of put that report together, put your information in there, does everyone understand the data that you collected? We have a lesson plan template. in the 805 resources shell. All you got to do is just type in your information. It already gives you the prompt on there. I'm going to show you where it's at. I'm going to do a screen share again, okay? It'll be in the 805 resources. I'm going to exit out and get down to it. Going to be down toward the bottom of the course shell. It's where all these documents you found for the team contract, the peer assessment rubric. And let's see. Here we go. Lesson plan template. It's one we put together at Fort Hays. It's in here. You can download it. It's literally a Word document. So if you download it on your desktop, you just simply go in and key in what's the name of the activity. Okay. So you look at the data and you think, okay, I'm going to come up with a lesson to target the data I collected, perhaps a weak area. So if you did it in math computation, you're going to take that low score, you're going to come up with a quick lesson that you could go back and reteach to help that student increase their understanding and knowledge of math computation. Grade level, what grade level is the student? Time needed for a lesson, might be 20 minutes. If the student had an IEP, what would you list as a goal for this lesson? Okay. Write one sentence for an objective, ABC. What's the audience, the behavior, condition, and degree? Simply go in there and just type it in. Background knowledge. Include what the teacher and students should know prior to the lesson. Okay. So you put in some basic information. By this point in time, for a third grade student, they should have a basic understanding of addition of two-digit numbers. Okay, just kind of giving you an example. Key vocabulary. What might be some key vocab that you would include in that lesson to help them understand? You would just list the vocab there, the terms. What resources and materials? Anything related to technology. List any equipment, technology that you would need in order to present that lesson. Engagement and opening. Just kind of give a brief introduction to how you would introduce that lesson. What are some learning activities that you would incorporate? Okay. Guided practice. What would be something that you would implement for them that you could provide guided practice where you're in the room overseeing as they work through it? And then any closure, kind of following up, kind of recap the lesson. How would you close up that lesson? Just type in a brief explanation. And then any follow-up, here you would describe an activity to do a follow-up, maybe the next day. After you taught this lesson, do a quick follow-up, have them go in and maybe give them a quick informal assessment, 3 to 4 problems. Okay, what would that informal assessment, what would it look like? And then if you had a formal assessment, what would it look like? You would assess them maybe at the end of the unit if you're covering it in math. Okay. Any classroom management, things that you need to consider. It says describe any strategies implemented to meet the students' behavior needs to help keep them on task and engaged. So if you got some students in your room that are showing some behavioral things, you might go ahead and put something in there as a preventive that you would do if the students were to start getting off task or displaying behavior. Okay, any type of differentiation or accommodation or modifications that you would need to make. Okay, so you would explain if I have to go back and reteach, what would it look like? What would be my objective? Any enrichment activities? What type of activity would I put in there if I wanted an enrichment activity? Any type of accommodations, modifications? How would you modify it if you had to go back? So it's just having a plan A and a plan B. If you had to go back and reteach it, it'll all be laid out there. And then any culturally or linguistic diverse learners. You may not have any. If not, just simply put NA out there. And then if there's any other additional information you feel like's relevant, you can pop it in. Okay. So you will turn that in with your informal assessment report. Okay. On this, I had some last semester. They were way overthinking this. I mean, each one of these blocks and putting the information in, they were putting half a page on each one of them, and they were working themselves in the ground. That's not what I'm looking for. I'm just looking for some quick information that if I were to come in and I'm going to observe you and look at this, I was like, okay, I can tell that Jared's going to do this, this, and this during his lesson. and he's already got a preventive here in case the students get off task and start developing behavior issue. It's there. It's just something I can quickly look at and determine, hey, I know what he's going to do, or I know what Pam would do. Okay. You don't have to put a half a page for each one of these things. Okay. That's overkill on it for this assignment. Okay. Any questions on that? And everyone's quiet tonight. My 804 group was really quiet. It's like everybody's just worn out. It's Wednesday. Any question or comment? No? All right. So as you start looking, remember that'll be due on Sunday. Again, these can be teacher made. It doesn't have to be anything that's commercially or professionally produced. It's not anything that's long and lengthy. Okay. So just come up with three. They could all three be in the same content area, or you can do three separate content areas. It's totally up to you. Okay. You could even do it on one on behavior if you wanted, or social skills. Okay. Just something that you can assess them, measure it, and report on. All right. Any question before we go? We're about to wrap up.
Um, so I use Easy CBM a lot,
Yeah, you can
and
actually post some on there to help do your informal. And I'll recommend you use Easy CBM later on when we actually focus on CBMs. So
right,
again,
um,
informal is a very simplified CBMs, all it is. It's a
well,
reduced CBM.
well, what I was gonna ask is, so on the math section, there's three sections. It's like math operations, geometry, and then math operations with algebra.
Yeah.
Would each one of those be considered
Yeah,
an
three
informal
separate ones.
assessment?
Yep. Three separate ones.
Okay,
Yep.
that's what I was hoping, because that's what I was
Okay.
going to use, because you can actually get a lot of data that way. So,
Sure. Absolutely. Yeah, you could use that for three separate ones because they're focusing on three different specific things. So, yeah. Any other question? Easy CBM too, by the way, guys. It's a great resource, great website. You can get a lot of information on it. You can go in there and click on the grade level, the content area, and all that, and it'll start providing a lot of information. Always really encourage students to use that, especially when we are working with CBMs around week 6. So check out that website. It's a good one. Any other questions or clarification? No? Okay, if you think of something after we get off here tonight, please email me again. I check them in the morning and again after 5 p.m. in the evening. So if I miss you on the early round, I'll catch you on the afternoon, early evening. Okay? Please don't hesitate to reach out and ask if you're stuck on something or not sure. Okay? All right. If you guys don't have any other questions, we'll kind of wrap up and bring it to an end. And look forward to seeing what you guys come up with on your informal assessment report. And then I'll plan on seeing you guys back here next Wednesday. Okay. All right. Thank you guys. Have a good rest of the week.